Service dog refuses to enter store, and what he sensed inside left everyone speechless. The moment Lisa Thompson's service dog Rocky planted his feet firmly on the ground and refused to cross the threshold of Jenkins General Store, she knew something was terribly wrong. In their 5 years together, the highly trained German Shepherd had never once disobeyed a command. Until now. "Come on, boy," Lisa whispered, gently tugging at Rocky's leash. But the dog remained immovable, his ears pricked forward and his muscular body tense. A low, almost inaudible whimper escaped his throat. The scorching August heat beat down on them as they stood at the entrance of the small-town store, where Lisa had shopped countless times before. At 62, her arthritic knees were acting up again, and all she wanted was to grab some groceries and head home to the comfort of her air-conditioned house. But Rocky's behavior sent chills down her spine, despite the sweltering temperature. Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly store owner, appeared in the doorway, her usually cheerful face creased with concern. "Is everything all right, dear? Rocky's always such a good boy. Never seen him act like this before." Lisa opened her mouth to respond when Rocky suddenly backed up several steps, his tail tucked between his legs. In all their years together, she'd learned to trust his instincts implicitly. Rocky wasn't just a service dog who helped her with mobility and balance. He was her guardian angel, her constant companion after her husband Tom's passing 3 years ago. "Something's wrong, Mrs. Jenkins," Lisa said, her voice trembling slightly. "Rocky's trying to tell us something." As if on cue, a faint crackling sound emanated from somewhere inside the store. Mrs. Jenkins frowned, sniffing the air. "Do you smell something burning?" Lisa's heart skipped a beat. Now that Mrs. Jenkins mentioned it, there was a subtle but distinct odor, like overheated electrical wiring. Her mind flashed back to the fire safety courses she'd taken as a former elementary school teacher. This wasn't just smoke. This was the precursor to an electrical fire. "Call 911, Lisa said firmly, her teacher's instincts kicking in. "We need to get everyone out of the store right now." Mrs. Jenkins didn't hesitate. As she pulled out her phone with shaking hands, Lisa peered through the store windows and spotted 3 customers browsing the aisles, completely unaware of the danger. Among them was old Mr. Chen, who was hard of hearing and might not respond to a verbal warning. Rocky stood at attention now, his earlier fear replaced by a determined alertness. He knew they had a job to do. Lisa took a deep breath and pushed through her own anxiety. The pain in her knees forgotten, she opened the door, allowing Rocky to guide her safely inside. "Everyone, please leave the store immediately," she called out, her voice carrying the authority she'd developed over 30 years in the classroom. "There may be an electrical fire starting. Please exit calmly but quickly." The customers looked up, startled. The smell was stronger now, and wisps of smoke had begun seeping from behind the refrigeration unit in the corner. Mr. Chen, as she'd feared, hadn't heard her warning and continued examining canned goods with his reading glasses perched on his nose. Lisa made her way to him, Rocky matching her pace perfectly, providing the support she needed. "Mr. Chen," she called out, touching his shoulder gently. The elderly man turned, his face lighting up in recognition before shifting to confusion as he registered her urgent expression. "Fire," she mouthed clearly, pointing to the smoke that was now more visible. His eyes widened and he nodded in understanding. As they helped Mr. Chen toward the exit, the crackling sound grew louder. Rocky's training kicked in as he sensed Lisa's increasing unsteadiness, pressing closer to her side to offer extra support. The heat and stress were taking their toll on her joints, but there wasn't time to rest. They emerged into the sunlight just as the first fire truck rounded the corner, its sirens wailing. Mrs. Jenkins stood on the sidewalk, clutching her phone, tears streaming down her face as she watched smoke begin to billow from her family's store, a business that had served their small community for over 50 years. Lisa reached out and squeezed the older woman's hand. "Rocky saved your store, Mrs. Jenkins. The firefighters are here in time, thanks to him." Rocky sat quietly beside them, his duty fulfilled as firefighters rushed past. One of them later confirmed what Rocky had somehow sensed. An electrical fault in the aging refrigeration unit had been moments away from igniting a potentially devastating fire. As a small crowd gathered to watch the firefighters work, Lisa felt a surge of pride and gratitude. In the 3 years since Tom's death, There had been many times she'd questioned her decision to stay in their small town rather than move closer to her children in the city. But as she looked around at the concerned faces of her neighbors, at Mrs. Jenkins, who was now hugging Rocky and calling him a hero, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. Rocky had not only prevented a tragedy today, he had reminded everyone of the extraordinary bonds between humans and their four-legged guardians, and the incredible ways they watch over us, even when we don't know we need watching over. Word of Rocky's heroics spread through the small town of Mill Creek like wildfire. The local newspaper's headline the next morning read, "Four-legged hero prevents tragedy at historic store." But for Lisa, the real story was just beginning to unfold in ways she never expected. The morning after the incident, Lisa sat on her front porch, sipping her morning coffee while Rocky lay at her feet, his chin resting on his paws. The early morning air was still cool, and her garden's roses were in full bloom, their sweet scent reminding her of peaceful mornings shared with Tom. She reached down to scratch behind Rocky's ears, remembering how her husband had encouraged her to get a service dog even in his final days. "You'll need someone to look after you when I'm gone," he'd said with that gentle smile of his. "And I want it to be someone who can keep up with your stubborn independence." Even then, fighting cancer, Tom had known exactly what she needed. The sound of a car door closing pulled Lisa from her memories. Looking up, she saw Annie Jenkins, Mrs. Jenkins' granddaughter, walking up her garden path. The young woman was carrying what looked like a freshly baked pie, and her eyes were red as if she'd been crying. "Mrs. Thompson," Annie called out, her voice cracking slightly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you too early." Lisa straightened in her chair, noting how Rocky's tail began to wag. He'd always had a soft spot for Annie, who often slipped him treats at the store. "Not at all, dear. Come sit with me." Annie placed the pie on the small porch table, apple from the smell of it, and sat down in the rocking chair next to Lisa. For a moment, she just watched Rocky, who had moved to rest his head on her knee in greeting. "Grandma told me what happened yesterday," Annie finally said, her fingers gently stroking Rocky's fur. "The firefighters said if the alarm hadn't been raised when it was, we could have lost everything. The electrical fire would have spread to the old storage room where Grandpa kept all his papers." Lisa noticed how Annie's voice caught on the word Grandpa. Old Mr. Jenkins had passed away 2 years ago, but his presence was still deeply felt in every corner of the store he'd built from nothing. "Your grandmother's a strong woman," Lisa said softly. "Just like you." Annie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "That's actually why I'm here. Grandma and I spent all night talking and, well, we made a decision. We're going to renovate the store. Not just repair the damage, but really bring it into this century, like Grandpa always wanted to, but never got around to." Lisa smiled, remembering how old Mr. Jenkins would talk about modernizing the store someday, even as he stubbornly kept his paper ledger and ancient cash register. "The thing is," Annie continued, her voice growing stronger, "we want to make it better for everyone. Proper ramps, wider aisles, one of those automatic doors." She turned to face Lisa fully. "And we want to make it more accessible for service animals too. A special rest area, water station, everything they might need. Rocky showed us how important service dogs are to our community." Lisa felt tears welling up in her eyes. Tom had always said that sometimes it takes a crisis to bring out the best in people, to remind them of what really matters. Annie reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. "We're going to need help planning it all. Someone who knows what people with mobility issues really need. Someone who understands both the practical and emotional aspects." She unfolded the paper, a roughly sketched floor plan. "Would you consider being our consultant, Mrs. Thompson? Your experience as a teacher, plus everything you've learned with Rocky, you'd be perfect." Lisa stared at the young woman, momentarily speechless. Since retiring from teaching and losing Tom, she'd struggled to find a new purpose, a way to keep contributing to her community. Now, looking at Annie's hopeful face and feeling Rocky's steady presence beside her, she felt a familiar spark igniting in her heart. "Before you answer," Annie added quickly, "there's something else. We found all of Grandpa's old photographs in the storage room while checking for damage. Pictures of the store from when it first opened, of all the families who've shopped there over the years." She smiled through fresh tears. We want to create a memory wall to show how the store has been part of this community's story. And we'd love for the first new photo to be of you and Rocky. Lisa looked down at Rocky, who gazed back at her with those soulful brown eyes that seemed to understand everything. In that moment, she realized that what had started as a potential tragedy had transformed into an opportunity, not just to preserve a piece of their town's history, but to make it better for future generations. Annie, Lisa said, reaching out to take the young woman's hand, I would be honored, but on one condition. She gestured to the still warm pie on the table. We discussed the plans over a slice of what I'm guessing is your grandmother's famous apple pie, and Rocky gets a little taste too. He's earned it, don't you think? Annie's laugh was like sunshine breaking through clouds. As she went inside to fetch plates and forks, Lisa sat back in her chair, watching Rocky's tail wag contentedly. Sometimes, she thought, heroes come in unexpected forms. And their greatest gift isn't just saving the day, it's bringing people together in ways that continue to create ripples of good long after the immediate crisis has passed. The renovation project at Jenkins General Store became the talk of Mill Creek, but not everyone embraced the changes with open arms. On a crisp September morning, as Lisa and Rocky made their way to the store for another planning meeting, they encountered Harold Peterson, a town council member known for his resistance to change, arguing with Mrs. Jenkins outside the store's temporary entrance. This is completely unnecessary, Harold's voice carried across the street. Your store has worked fine for 50 years. These renovations will destroy its historical character. And who's going to pay for all this? Lisa felt Rocky tense beside her, picking up on the confrontational tone. She patted his head reassuringly as they approached. Easy, boy. Some people just need a little more time to understand. Mrs. Jenkins spotted them and visibly relaxed. Lisa, Rocky, thank goodness you're here. Perhaps you can help explain to Councilman Peterson why these changes matter. Harold turned, his face flushed with frustration. With all due respect, Mrs. Thompson, this goes beyond one heroic incident. We're talking about completely changing a historic landmark, and now I hear you're planning to install some sort of fancy electronic system that'll cost a fortune. Lisa straightened her spine, channeling the patience she'd developed over decades of teaching. Harold, do you remember Tommy Blake? The question caught him off guard. What? Of course I do. My son played baseball with him in high school. Nice kid. Had that accident a few years back. Yes, Lisa nodded. Tommy uses a wheelchair now. Did you know he can't shop here anymore? The aisles are too narrow, and he can't reach half the shelves. His mother Margaret has to shop for him. Harold's expression wavered slightly. I didn't realize. And Mrs. Chen, you remember her from your mother's bridge club? She stopped coming in after Mr. Chen's hearing got worse. She's afraid he might not hear a warning if there's another emergency. Lisa gestured to Rocky. What happened that day wasn't just about preventing a fire. It showed us how we can make things better for everyone. Annie emerged from the store carrying a thick folder of documents. Mr. Peterson, we've actually done all the calculations. Would you like to see them? We've received 3 grants already, and the Chamber of Commerce is backing us. They believe these improvements will attract more business to the whole downtown area. Harold's objections began to deflate as Annie walked him through the practical aspects of the plan. Lisa watched with pride as the young woman confidently addressed each concern, her grandmother beaming beside her. In that moment, Lisa saw what Tom had always tried to teach their own children, that the most powerful way to change minds was through patience, understanding, and hard facts. Rocky nudged Lisa's hand, and she realized her knee was starting to ache from standing too long. Mrs. Jenkins immediately noticed and brought out a chair from inside. Here, dear, we can have our meeting right here in the sunshine. Harold, would you like to join us? See exactly what we're planning? To everyone's surprise, Harold hesitated, then nodded. I suppose it couldn't hurt to learn more. But I want to understand everything, especially about this memorial wall you're planning. As they settled into an impromptu meeting on the sidewalk, more townspeople began to gather. Rocky lay contentedly at Lisa's feet, occasionally accepting gentle pats from passers-by. Lisa noticed how people naturally formed a circle, making sure everyone could see and be part of the discussion. Even Billy, the teenager who usually spent his mornings glued to his phone, stopped to listen and offered suggestions about making the store more appealing to young people. The morning sun rose higher as ideas flowed freely. Harold, to everyone's amazement, began contributing his own suggestions, drawing from his experience with other small-town renewal projects. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "my sister's town did something similar with their old pharmacy. Ended up bringing in folks from 3 counties over." Mrs. Jenkins touched Lisa's shoulder gently. "Who would have thought that Rocky's warning would lead to all this? It's like he didn't just save the store. He helped us save our community's heart." Lisa watched as Rocky's ears perked up at the mention of his name. She remembered something Tom used to say about how sometimes angels don't have wings. They have paws, and they lead us exactly where we need to go, even if we don't know we need to go there. As the group continued their animated discussion, Lisa pulled out her phone and quietly took a picture. There they all were. Harold gesturing enthusiastically at the building plans, Annie taking notes, Mrs. Jenkins sharing her vision, and various townspeople contributing their ideas, all brought together by one dog's remarkable instincts and unwavering dedication to service. The photograph, she decided, would be perfect for the memory wall. Not just because it captured a moment of change, but because it showed how a community could come together, how resistance could transform into support, and how the simple act of listening to each other could build bridges stronger than any physical renovation ever could. Rocky shifted slightly, resting his chin on her foot, and Lisa smiled. Sometimes the greatest service animals provide isn't in the dramatic moments of rescue, but in the quiet ways they bring people together, breaking down barriers and opening hearts one paw print at a time. 2 months into the renovation project, Lisa found herself standing in the middle of Jenkins General Store, surrounded by the buzz of construction workers and the steady rhythm of progress. Rocky sat alertly by her side, his eyes tracking the movement around them with keen interest. The store had been closed for regular business, but today was special. They were doing a walkthrough with the contractor to check on the accessibility features. "The automatic doors are installed," Mike the contractor said proudly, demonstrating how they opened with just the right timing. "And look here, Mrs. Thompson. We've got the non-slip flooring down in most sections. Even installed those textured guide strips you suggested for visually impaired customers." Lisa felt a lump form in her throat as she watched Rocky confidently navigate the newly widened aisles. The store was transforming into something beyond anything they'd initially imagined. But it wasn't just the physical changes that moved her. It was the way the entire community had rallied around the project. Just last week, the high school woodworking class had volunteered to build custom display cases for the memory wall. The local tech club, led by young Billy, had set up a digital archive where people could upload their own stories and photos of the store. Even Harold Peterson had become one of their strongest advocates, speaking passionately at town meetings about the importance of accessible spaces. As they continued their inspection, Lisa heard the store's side door open, followed by the unmistakable sound of wheels on the new flooring. "Hello? Mrs. Jenkins said I could come by today?" Lisa turned to see Tommy Blake propelling his wheelchair through the doorway, his mother Margaret standing behind him with tears in her eyes. It was Tommy's first time inside the store since his accident 3 years ago. Rocky immediately walked over to greet Tommy, placing his head gently on the young man's knee. The service dog had always had a special connection with Tommy, even before the accident, when the teenager used to help out at the store during summers. "This is amazing," Tommy said, easily maneuvering his wheelchair through the aisles. "Look, Mom, I can reach everything on these new shelves." He demonstrated by smoothly adjusting his chair's position to access the adjustable height displays. Margaret Blake dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I never thought, we'd gotten so used to shopping separately. This is the first store in town where Tommy can shop independently." Mike the contractor cleared his throat, clearly moved. "Wait until you see what we've done with the checkout area. We've got 2 different counter heights, and the card reader swivels to whatever position you need." As they showed Tommy around, more people began arriving for the walkthrough. Mrs. Jenkins and Annie, Harold Peterson, Mr. and Mrs. Chen, with their new hearing aids that the community had helped fund, and several other townspeople who had contributed to the project in various ways. Lisa watched as Tommy demonstrated to the group how easily he could navigate the store's new layout. Rocky stayed close to him, as if appointed as his personal tour guide. The sight reminded her of something Tom used to say about his years as a building contractor. The best structures aren't just built with wood and nails, they're built with heart and hope. Mrs. Chen approached Lisa, speaking in her careful English. You know, when my husband's hearing got worse, we thought we would have to move to the city, closer to our children. But now, she gestured around the store, at the newly installed emergency light system that would flash in case of any problems, at the clear signage with both text and universal symbols. Now we can stay in our home. Annie joined them, tablet in hand, showing them the latest addition to the digital archive, a series of before and after photos showcasing the store's transformation. Look at this one, she said, pulling up a particular image. It was from the day Rocky had refused to enter the store, captured by a security camera. The timestamp showed just how close they'd come to losing everything. If Rocky hadn't sensed that danger, Mrs. Chen began. It's not just what he prevented, Lisa said softly, reaching down to stroke Rocky's fur as he returned to her side. It's what he started. Sometimes it takes a special kind of courage to show us what needs to change. As the group moved toward the area designated for the memory wall, now framed by beautiful wooden cases crafted by the high school students, Lisa noticed something extraordinary. The afternoon sun, streaming through the new energy-efficient windows, cast a warm glow over the gathered community members. In that light, she could see how the store's transformation had changed more than just its physical space. It had transformed them all. Rocky sat beside her, his posture alert but relaxed, watching over the group as they shared their hopes for the store's future. Lisa realized that while his initial act of bravery had saved the building, his true gift had been showing them how to build something even more precious. A community where everyone belonged, where every person's needs mattered, and where one small act of courage could ripple out to touch countless lives. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the renovated space, Lisa couldn't help but think that Tom would have loved seeing this. Not just the physical improvements, but the way their little town had come together, proving that sometimes the greatest renovations happen not in buildings, but in hearts. The grand reopening of Jenkins General Store fell on a perfect autumn morning, exactly 3 months after Rocky's life-saving warning. A red ribbon stretched across the new automatic doors, and the entirety of Mill Creek seemed to have gathered on the sidewalk. Lisa stood near the front of the crowd, Rocky sitting proudly beside her, his coat freshly brushed for the occasion. "Ready, boy?" she whispered. Rocky's tail wagged in response, his eyes fixed on the doors he had once refused to enter. Now, thanks to his actions that day, the store had become something none of them could have imagined. Mrs. Jenkins stepped forward, her eyes glistening as she surveyed the crowd. "Before we cut this ribbon," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "I want to share something with you all. My late husband used to say that a store isn't just a building where you buy things. It's a place where community happens. Today, we're reopening more than just a store. We're celebrating what happens when a community listens to each other, cares for each other, and grows together." She gestured to the side of the building where a plaque had been mounted next to the entrance. "This is why we've decided to make a small change to our name." With a nod to Annie, she pulled away the covering to reveal the new sign. Jenkins General Store and Community Center, where every heart finds home. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Lisa felt tears welling up in her eyes as she read the smaller text beneath, dedicated to Rocky, whose courage showed us the way, and to all service animals who light our paths. Tommy Blake wheeled forward, carrying a large pair of scissors on his lap. "Mrs. Thompson, Rocky," he called out, "would you do us the honor?" Lisa made her way forward, Rocky matching her pace perfectly. Together with Mrs. Jenkins and Tommy, they approached the ribbon. Lisa took the scissors, but before cutting, she turned to address the crowd. 3 months ago, Rocky refused to enter this store because he sensed danger. Today, he's leading us into something wonderful. She knelt down beside her faithful companion. "Want to help me, boy?" Rocky gently placed his paw over her hand on the scissors. Together, they cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in cheers as the automatic doors smoothly slid open. Mr. Chen, wearing his new hearing aids, was among the first to enter, his wife by his side. The high school woodworking students proudly showed their families the memory wall they had crafted. Billy demonstrated the digital archive kiosk to a group of seniors, showing them how to access decades of community memories with just a touch. Inside, the store had been transformed. Wide, welcoming aisles gleamed under warm lighting. The adjustable shelving made products accessible to everyone. A comfortable seating area invited people to linger and chat. But most striking was the wall of photographs, a visual history of the store and its place in their community. In the center of the display hung the photograph Lisa had taken that day of the planning meeting on the sidewalk. Next to it was a new image, Rocky sitting alertly by the store's entrance, his expression somehow both vigilant and gentle. Beneath it was a simple caption, "Some angels have paws." Harold Peterson approached Lisa, shaking his head in wonder. "You know, when I fought against these changes, I thought we were going to lose something precious. Instead, we gained so much more. This isn't just a store anymore. It's a blueprint for what our town can be." As the morning wore on, Lisa watched from a quiet corner as people explored the renovated space. She saw Tommy helping elderly Mrs. Parker learn to use the new checkout system. Annie was leading a group of curious children on a tour, pointing out all the special features. Even Rocky had a small crowd of admirers, accepting their attention with his usual dignified grace. Mrs. Jenkins joined Lisa, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I've been thinking," she said, handing one to Lisa. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't trusted Rocky that day. You could have dismissed his warning, tried to force him inside." Lisa smiled, watching Rocky demonstrate his service dog skills for a fascinated group of young parents. "Tom always said that trust is a two-way street. Rocky trusts me to understand him, and I trust him to guide me right." "He's guided all of us," Mrs. Jenkins said softly. "And look what it led to." As if on cue, Rocky returned to Lisa's side, pressing against her leg in his familiar, comforting way. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, remembering that moment 3 months ago when he had refused to cross the threshold. Back then, she thought he was just protecting them from a fire. Now she understood. He had been leading them towards something much bigger. The morning sun streamed through the new windows, casting a warm glow over the gathered community. Lisa watched as people moved through the store, not just shopping but connecting, sharing stories, helping each other. This was what Tom had always talked about, how the smallest acts of courage could open doors to possibilities none of us could imagine. Rocky let out a contented sigh, his mission accomplished. He had done more than save a store. He had helped build a bridge between what was and what could be. And as Lisa looked around at her transformed community, she knew that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where every paw print led to a future where everyone belonged. After all, sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear capes or medals. Sometimes they simply sit quietly beside us, showing us the way forward with nothing more than a faithful heart and an unwavering belief in what we can become when we work together.